Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine war news update, second part thereof for the 16th of November 2023. Sorry this is a bit later than I was hoping. I've just been looking at lots of footage on Twitter of just huge amounts of stuff getting blown up. I think we've got to another stage. You look at the length of the war and you have these hot points throughout the chronology of the war where you see huge amounts of equipment getting taken out. Say Vuhledar, where we saw 100 pieces of Russian kit just blown up over a series of days and weeks. That was just, you know, it's a real rich time for being able to justify high general staff loss figures for Russian equipment. Well, I think we're at that again at the moment, where over the last few weeks, really since the Avdiivka counter-attack from Russia started, we've just seen huge amounts of equipment lost. But not just there. We're seeing it in the Velika Novoselka salient. We're seeing it in and around Bakhmut. We're seeing it again around Avdiivka. I've just seen a number of bits of equipment taken out by Javelin and anti-tank mines, just taken out again, and I saw a HIMARS strike on a Zala drone unit. So a van that pulls up, guys get out, they pull this big Zala drone out, and then a HIMARS strike. So that tells you that they're using high value munitions to take out things like that, because they know what these drones can do in terms of spotting, in terms of, you know, if that drone is used to go and spot for a strike on a Ukrainian airbase, then that could be responsible for destroying millions and dollars worth of kit, but also a huge amount of Ukrainian air capability. So therefore, it's justified in using these high value munitions to take out, say, this drone unit. But the HIMARS strike actually strikes what you might think is quite far away from that, and you think, oh, that's a bit of a miss. But it just goes to show that the destructive capability of these tungsten ball bearings or tungsten fragments that fly out. So you see the immediate explosion around and the dust come up, and you think, okay, that's the radius of these fragments. But the drone, the truck, and the guy dragging the drone are outside of that radius by quite some distance, and then he falls over and he's done in, and the drone actually starts catching on fire. And then the van is on fire later. So you think, actually, those fragments fly much further than you might initially think, and it's invisible to the drone footage quite far up. But actually, they are shredding all sorts of stuff all around. And they're you know, that guy is at least incredibly debilitated. You see him like crawling around a bit later. He's done in from that, and the vehicle and the drone itself are destroyed. So just seeing all this footage coming out, you're thinking we are somewhat justified, I think, in thinking the general staff figures are at least, you know, somewhat accurate. Right, moving on to this video and military aid. There's not a huge amount of military aid stuff to talk about, but I'm going to go through a fairly long thread that I think is of great interest to do with cruise missiles. But first, Zelensky and Justin Trudeau from the Canadian Prime Minister have been talking, discussing air defense. Hopefully something tangible comes out of that to allow Ukraine even more equipment. And now this thread on the cruise missile, basically usage, stocks and usage. This is Fabian Hoffman, who had previously done an analysis where he's like, okay, here are the potential numbers of Storm Shadow and Scalps that Ukrainians have been given. So I'm going to think, have they been given 400, 500 or 600 of these missiles? And if they use them at this kind of rate, so here he's done an analysis at 30 a month, 40 a month or 50 a month. And given these three initial starting points, where would we expect, or when would we expect Ukraine to run out of these missiles? And I actually think this is fairly charitable, this initial assessment. He goes on to correct it a bit later, because I think we've already started them seeing them tail off in their usage over the last month. And I think that probably indicates that they're running low on stocks, which means either they got fewer back here or they've been using them at unsustainable rates. So, for example, if they were given 600 and they use them at 30 a month, you could expect that stock to last until December 2024. So that's another year left of Storm Shadow and Scalp usage at 30 a month. So that's one a day. If they're using it at 40 a month, you'd expect 600 to start running out in July 2024, and using 40 a month at 50 a month, they'd run out in April time If they, however, had only 400, you would see them start running out now if they were using them at 50 a month, right? So anyway, he says it's time to reassess Ukraine's consumption of Storm Shadow Scalp EG missiles and the sustainability of its remaining land attack cruise missile arsenal. The analysis shows that in order to ensure a robust long-range strike capability, Ukraine requires Taurus cruise missiles. In August 2023, roughly 3 months after first receiving Storm Shadow Scalp EG cruise missiles from France and the UK, I estimated that Ukraine had received between 250 to 500 cruise missiles and was using around 75 a month. So that's a high usage a month and a fairly middle-of-the-road to guess at the initial stock. Now, I believe he says that Ukraine has likely received 400 to 500 Storm Shadow Scalp cruise missiles from France, UK, and possibly Italy. Interesting, and I've not heard that. It's also possible that Ukraine had been promised more, potentially up to 600, but I consider that scenario unlikely. In terms of consumption, there is no doubt that Ukraine has significantly reduced its usage of Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles. I agree. Considering the initial high usage, the average monthly consumption has now decreased to an estimated 30 to 50 missiles per month. Taking into account the initial arsenal size of 400 to 600 missiles, and an average monthly consumption rate of 30 to 50 missiles, I now assess that Ukraine will likely run out of Storm Shadow Scalps somewhere between January and December 2024. Well, that's obviously a really big spread. So if they had 400 and they were using them, so we've got the same 30, 40, 50, then 30 a month would they start running out in May to June. If they got 600 at 30 a month, as I say, December next year. This estimate assumes that Ukraine retains an operational reserve of around 30 missiles, meaning the overall stockpile likely wouldn't reach zero. Note also that if Ukraine would get close to this minimum reserve number, its consumption would likely decrease further. This means that under the most optimistic scenario, purely in terms of arsenal sustainability, not in terms of military effectiveness, Ukraine retains a credible land attack cruise missile capability until the end of next year. Please take note of the fact that you cannot fight an effective missile campaign with only 30 strikes per month, especially if you are barred from engaging the most critical targets like Kerch Bridge in Crimea or important facilities inside Russia. In these low usage scenarios, individual strikes may have localized effect or offer symbolic value, but likely contribute little to the overall balance of power in the battlefield and are more unlikely and even more unlikely to achieve strategic level effects. Ukrainian Storm Shadow Scalp EG scarcity is the number one reason why Ukraine needs Taurus. Without resupply of land attack cruise missiles, Ukraine will be forced to limit its consumption further, drastically undermining its ability to take back territory. German politicians must realize that Taurus is not a luxury, it's a necessity. While increasing overall military aid is commendable, so that's Germany, it is equally important to provide the specific resources required for achieving victory. This is a really good point. So Germany's done a phenomenal job. I keep singing their praises. They are giving so much stuff and a lot of good equipment. However, that's still not enough. Like, Ukraine still need more, and they need to give Taurus. Really, really do. Ukraine's indigenous missile industry cannot fill the gaps left by the absence of Western cruise missile resupplies in 2024. While ATACMS and GLSDB, so ground-launched small diameter bombs, which haven't found a way to Ukrainian stocks yet, provide standoff strike capability, they do not possess the same capability profile as Storm Shadow, Scalp EG, and Taurus. In other words, you can't replace what these cruise missiles can do with ATACMS and GLSDB. Those are good for doing certain things, but cruise missiles, especially with their broach warheads, they're two-stage warheads that can blow up bunkers. One part of the missile blows up to get the outside of the bunker out of the way, and then the second part, the stage, blows up as it's inside the bunker, for example. So these are useful weapons that can't be fulfilled in other ways. So unlike ATACMS, Storm Shadow and Scalp and Taurus have the ability to fly along complex trajectories in order to evade missile defenses. They are also capable of successfully engaging hardened and buried targets with a high probability of success. Note also that neither France nor the UK have started a Storm Shadow Scalp EG production line. This is key. Like, why has this not happened? I hope it has, really, but arguably it hasn't for Ukraine, at least not according to open source data. So that's a point. It may have actually happened. This means that the two countries will not be able to resupply Ukraine beyond their own stockpiles, which are running low. I mean, surely they're upping production of that. Okay. Useful thread, thank you. This is the controversial news, perhaps, that the Russians are buying a Canadian Sky-Eye drone detection system. How is that getting through sanctions? What sanctions doing? The Russian University of Technology has acquired a Sky-Eye drone detection system for 4.5 million rubles. The system is manufactured by the Canadian company Skyscope Technologies. Maybe get on the blower to Justin Trudeau and say, WTF. In the next package of sanctions, the EU will ban supplies to Russia of engines that can be used for drones, according to Bloomberg. It's this kind of news, and the next piece is the same. Why has this not already happened? Package also includes a ban on diamond exports and measures to strengthen control over compliance with the ceiling on Russian oil prices. So there have been these claims in the last few days that actually the Russians are successfully selling oil above the oil cap, which is why the Danish have been touted as there's pressure put on the Danish to start checking Russian vessels as they cross the straits past Denmark. There needs to be a closure of these loopholes. The Russians are still making too much money. It's as simple as that. The EU proposed to ban the export of machines and parts that Russia uses to manufacture weapons. Again, why is it taking this long? And proposes to add chemicals, lithium batteries, thermostats, engines and servo motors for drones to the list of prohibited goods. Yes, damn it, get on it and do it. But, a year ago. However, I mean, this is the usefulness of entities like the EU. Say what you like about the EU, whether you're pro-EU or anti-EU. You know my position. I'm pro-EU because of reasons like this. Like, you don't solve global problems with a whole bunch of unilateral countries making decisions. In order to get things effectively done, whether it be fighting climate change, whether it be closing tax loopholes for companies like Amazon and Google, right? Whether it be fighting entities like Russia in the political realm, you don't do that unilaterally. You can't do those things unilaterally. This is why I think Britain leaving the EU was a mistake. We should reform it from within and be a really important member of the EU to be in a position to reap the rewards of being in the EU as well as informing what they can do. However, put that to the side. What the EU can do is enact sanctions across 30 member states, right? That suddenly, right, none of you guys can sell stuff to Russia, rather than 30 states have to go, okay, we'll do that, but then have to be the enforcers of their own rules, which is much more unlikely, especially if those nations are going to make money off that. So the EU saying, right, we're going to sanction Russia, being geographically next to Russia, and all of those countries together means that actually it has a much greater effect. And that's the usefulness of trade blocks, both in terms of doing trade, but in terms of sanctions and things like that. Anyway, enough of that. Let's move on to geopolitical stuff, and there's so much to talk about. Okay, let's rip through it. Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Biden have met in San Francisco. This is super important. Let's discuss this a little bit. Okay, 5 points brought up by Status 6 here. Saying White House statement regarding results of the Xi Jinping-Joe Biden meeting. 1. The resumption of high-level military-to-military communication, as well as the US-China defense policy coordination talks and the US-China military maritime consultative agreement meetings. Both sides are also resuming telephone conversations between theatre commanders. In other words, what happened is, after the balloon incident, they stopped talking to each other, and the military connection between the two just was cut. That's been resumed. Good. 2. The two leaders affirmed the need to address the risks of advanced AI systems and improve AI safety through US-China government talks. 3. The resumption of bilateral cooperation to combat global illicit drug manufacturing and trafficking. So I think fentanyl was brought up, including synthetic drugs like fentanyl, and establishment of a working group. I really should read these first for ongoing communication and law enforcement coordination on counter narcotics issues. 4. Xi Jinping and Joe Biden committed to work towards a significant further increase in scheduled passenger flights early next year, in parallel with actions to restore full implementation of the US-China air transport transportation agreement. 5, the two agreed that their teams will follow up on their talks in San Francisco with continued high-level diplomacy and interactions, including visits in both directions and ongoing working-level consultations in key areas. Right. If you're going to stop China attacking Taiwan, you've got really two options. One, have nothing to do with China, but threaten them. If you attack them, we're going to hit you with our own... We'll go to war, basically. Or two, you say, right, let's talk a little bit. Let's do some diplomacy. Let's get a little bit closer. And let's integrate with each other and interact with each other, which means that actually... If you do that, we're going to shut off this trade route there and do, let's have these conversations and this closer working environment so that we can affect your international diplomacy without having to resort to just threatening to hit you with missiles. This is incredibly important. The warning would be this kind of what we tried to do with Putin in Europe, except I think it was not as guarded as this probably would be. It's like, welcome Putin, and we're going to buy the shit out of your hydrocarbons and and be dependent on them. Well, actually, the world buys Chinese stuff anyways. That's all, that's kind of, that horse has bolted. But these kind of much more guarded but formalized diplomatic interactions, I think, are necessary, and hopefully I don't think you'll get to the same position with Xi Jinping as Europe got with Putin. But that might be the warning. Anyway, Anton Gerashchenko adds to this. Side stated that Biden and Xi, quote, agreed to pick up the phone and talk in times of disagreement. He called the talks, quote, some of the most constructive and productive discussions we've had. So there's really good signs coming out here. The White House website says that US and China agreed to, quote, manage competition responsibly to prevent it from descending into conflict, confrontation, or a new Cold War. So important. So this is what the retired general from the ISW was saying the other day on Ukraine, the latest I played to you. So we shouldn't see China as the enemy. We should see them as a competitor, but we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket in terms of them being a competitor or them being an enemy. It should be they're a competitor and with an element of being the enemy. So understanding them as both of those things means that we'll probably get, and this looks to be what this discussion has kind of arrived at, we'll get to deal with them more effectively. The two governments will also negotiate to, quote, improve the security of artificial intelligence. White House briefly addressed the Ukrainian issue. The US intends to, quote, ensure that Ukraine emerges from this war as a democratic, independent, sovereign and prosperous country that can deter and defend itself from future aggression. Of course, that's not at all what China is. And interestingly, Biden, to his credit, when he was pressed on whether he still thinks Xi Jinping's a dictator, basically said, well, yeah, he's a dictator because they don't have the same democratic setup that we do. It's just a simple fact. Separately, the US said that Xi pledged during his conversation with Biden not to attempt to retake Taiwan militarily and, quote, made clear that they prefer reunification by peaceful means, but also outlined, quote, conditions for the potential use of force. So that's still there. There's still that threat of Taiwan there. China stated after the meeting that the two sides, quote, the two sides had a frank and in-depth exchange of views on strategically important issues. In addition to interstate agenda, they discussed topics affecting the world. Xi confirmed that he decided to resume high-level military contacts. The Chinese leader added that, quote, China has interests to protect, principles to uphold, and red lines that cannot be crossed. He expressed his desire that the two sides, quote, refrain from sudden movements, provocative actions, and crossing lines. China and the US should also, quote, communicate more, have more dialogues and consultations. Xi urged America to, quote, provide more public goods to the world and strengthen humanitarian exchanges between the countries in tourism and education. There was no mention of Ukraine in China's reports. Anyway, hopefully that's a good analysis of both, or a bit of a summary of both sides of the discussions there. Right. Cameron, so Lord Cameron, as he is now known, I can't call him that because it just seems so ridiculous. Why should I call him Lord? He's got a full lifetime peerage, but that was rushed in. Like, it was just, he was only given that on the basis of he had to be given a peerage in order to be a non-serving member of parliament that is now in the cabinet as Foreign Secretary. Anyway, as the BBC has to say, Lord Cameron became Foreign Secretary in a cabinet shuffle on Monday. Quote, "This is very important, especially now when the world is paying attention not only to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine, and dividing the focus really does not help," the Ukrainian president said, alluding to the Middle East. Absolutely. So Cameron's over. He's visited Kyiv. This is already, he's out there doing stuff, which is good news, I think. Let's hope he's strong and robust. There are two camps as to whether this was a good move. Some people think, I said previously, I think it would be good in terms of gravitas, but actually Cameron has a pretty dodgy foreign diplomacy record from when he was Prime Minister. And even Rory Stewart, who's a former Conservative MP, was not singing his, giving him a ringing endorsement particularly, although I don't think they see eye to eye. So, you know, you can see this appointment from two directions. Anyway, says Zelensky, "We're grateful for the unwavering support of Ukraine from the UK. We are grateful for the warm welcome of Ukrainian citizens in the UK, and we're glad that you came to Ukraine." So that's, you know, Cameron personally. Mr. Zelensky posted a short clip of the meeting onto social media, during which Cameron can be heard saying, "I wanted this to be my first visit." Really good messaging there. That's really good from Cameron. "What I want to say by being here is that we will continue to give you the moral support, the diplomatic support, and the economic support, and above all, the military support that you need, not just this year and next year, but however long it takes." Brilliant. Although we're in for it for as long as it takes, rather than much more clear in those objectives. Former UK Prime Minister added, quote, "I've had some disagreements with Boris Johnson. We've known each other for 40 years, but his support for you was the finest thing he and his government did." This is, I mean, I would agree with this wholeheartedly, by the way. I'm no Boris Johnson fan, and I would agree that was the best thing. And it's interesting to see a former Conservative Prime Minister say exactly the same thing. In a statement following the meeting, Cameron said, "As winter approaches, we continue to stand with the Ukrainian people as they resist Putin's illegal invasion. In the last 3 months, they've pushed Russia back in the Black Sea and are opening vital sea trade routes for the Ukrainian economy and global food supplies." Let's hope that this brings about, there's lots more to say here, but let's hope that this brings about the UK giving much more military aid. But don't forget that one, our stocks, our cupboards are probably bare. Two, the UK are doing things in other contexts. So, for example, we are doing a lot, as I reported yesterday, in terms of Ukrainian grain export, in helping with, in terms of higher insurance costs, underwriting those higher insurance payments that are having to be made for the war risk insurance for the ships with Ukrainian grain leaving the Black Sea. So UK does other things other than provide, as I'm sure all nations do, but sometimes I can be seen as being a little bit hard on the UK. So I think we should be giving, I think we've taken our foot off the gas a little bit over the last probably 6 months since Ben Wallace has left. I'm not blaming Grant Shapps, but I actually probably more Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, for not having it top of his agenda. And I just think our own military is underfunded. So we waste a lot of money procuring stuff that's not very well thought through. I could go on, but essentially I think we need to give more, and I think hopefully Cameron is going to be able to facilitate that. But we are also doing things that isn't necessarily advertised when you do lists of equipment being given. As I say, the maritime insurance and intelligence and special forces and training and so on and so forth. Right, the Kyiv Independent says Slovakia's ex-defense minister, Martin Sklenar, told the Kyiv Independent that an inability to understand the seriousness of the war and declining support for Ukraine could be disastrous for Slovakia's security. So he's obviously rhetorically fighting against the present position as the new Slovakian government with the Prime Minister Robert Fico, who's come in and has this kind of odd alliance with the far right party there and another party. They've got this coalition, but they've been saying no to military support of Ukraine. It's a hard no, and they are very much positioning themselves in line, really, with the Kremlin, or much more so than they were previously. Now, the ex-defense minister is here saying that ain't cool, and it's just, you know, a lack of an inability to understand the seriousness of the war. Yeah. Right, Finland intends to close the border with Russia today. Now, I had seen an announcement that had happened. I think it was the Kiev Independent, but then the tweet's been deleted. So I don't know if that is happening or not. But Finland could well be closing the border today. Now, I have to do a correction to something I claimed the other day. I misinterpreted the news. The news was that undocumented migrants were getting through the border from Russia to Finland, and I just assumed that was Russians trying to escape. It's not. So this is what Belarus are doing with Poland, really, and the Baltic states, which is promoting illegal immigrants from, say, Africa and other places, the Middle East, Persian sort of area, promoting those undocumented, like, illegal migrants to filter through Finnish border areas to sow discord in Finnish society, right? So it's nothing to do with Russians. This is like illegal migrants. And Finland, like Poland and the Baltics, are not too happy with this. And so they have now threatened to close their borders. That's supposed to be being done today. We'll see if that's happened. That's significant. Obviously, the Russians are not going to be happy with that at all. Okay, Ukraine now needs even more support, as it is no longer, quote, getting the attention it so desperately needs because of events in the Middle East, says the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. Again, it's really good that, we've had Cameron saying sort of similar things, or at least implying similar things. Here we have and Zelensky himself. Here we have Steinmeier saying this on behalf of German politics, saying that, we need to keep our focus on Ukraine. Don't be distracted by what's going on in the Middle East. This is still really important. Now, 4 reasons the West should finally seize Russia's frozen assets for Ukraine. Legally justified seizing frozen Russian assets for Ukraine deters authoritarian aggression, and if done collectively, won't destabilize Western economies, a new report suggests. So this is in the Euromaidan press. Let's have a quick look at this. Okay, everyone fears escalation from Russia, no matter what form it takes. Furthermore, after the war ends, they expect to continue business as usual with Russia. But if they confiscate this money, the Russians will take offense and refuse to deal with them. Okay, just quickly. So, a few bits and pieces. Right, if we come down here, we had a budget gap of $40 billion, says Zelensky to Reuters. It was last year. This year we managed better, and now there is a 5% increase in GDP. But anyway, we have a big gap. If we use only interest from all of this money that's frozen, all this frozen money, we can close about half of this gap. So just using the interest, and we talked about this recently, that actually these frozen assets are generating money. Just use that, cream that off to help sustain Ukraine in this war. With total confiscation, G7 and EU partners would avoid the ongoing challenge of collecting funds for Ukraine annually, amounting to tens of billions, which is neither realistic nor an attractive long-term approach. So this gets around a whole load of issues if it's able to be done. And there's lots of talk here about exactly how much they have in frozen assets. There are legal arguments to overcoming the issues. So there's simply no basis for saying Russia can violate Ukraine's sovereignty while invoking its own sovereignty as an inviolable shield, says Lawrence Tribe, professor of constitutional law at Harvard Law School. Key principles assert that countermeasures must correspond to the injury, and Russia has obligations to cease aggression and provide compensation. Confiscated assets need not be fully returned until reparations equal the full scale of damage, something I've talked about before, which is, okay, we're going to take, $10 billion of stuff off you. We're not going to use it, but we're not going to give it back until you've given $10 billion worth of reparations to Ukraine. European Parliament, in its draft resolution for the Ukrainian facility, justifies the confiscation of Russian state assets as a measure of collective self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. This aligns with the Parliament's earlier call for collective self-defense, urging EU member states to provide weapons, share intelligence, and implement non-military measures like economic sanctions. Russia's aggression, causing a 29.2% GDP decline in Ukraine, justifies transferring frozen assets as an act of collective self-defense. Legal justification can be based on the EU military assistance mission Ukraine's mandate. Supporting Ukraine's right to self-defense, EU member states can confiscate Russian assets to aid Ukraine's exercise of this right, meaning that meaning the criteria of necessity and proportionality. In a broader context, NATO recognizes Russia as the most significant threat, emphasizing the importance of supporting Ukraine in preventing future aggression, aligning with G7 and EU interests. And then there's a lot of talk here about that to do with reserves and gold, and it's not having the effect some detractors think it will in terms of those contexts. And then opponents of confiscation argue that Western currency's key strength lies in predictability and stability due to effective institutions. While true, this doesn't mean the West cannot use funds from the aggressor state to compensate for damages in Ukraine's self-defense against the largest war of aggression since World War II. Predictability doesn't equal inflexibility. Justified steps should be grounded and explained. To minimize risks and avoid de-dollarization or de-euroization, a joint effort by the G7 and EU to confiscate Russian assets is crucial. Establishing legal mechanisms with clear criteria related to Russia's war of aggression signals that the confiscation is justified and not arbitrary. And a final quote: the idea is to do this multilaterally. If others didn't, there might be a flight from the dollar. But if it is done by all the major currencies, where are people going to move their money? Said the former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. So it's dipping into a lot of really big ideas there, but you get the idea that lots of people are thinking long and hard about the idea of frozen assets. Right. On that subject, Prague has frozen Russian state assets in Czechia. Minister of Foreign Affairs Jan Lipavsky has announced the decision marks the end of commercial activities through which Russia funds the killing of Ukrainians, the minister added. Strong rhetoric there from Czechia. European Commission is putting pressure on Poland over blocking checkpoints. So there are now some tremendous issues with checkpoints. There's imagery of incredibly long lines of trucks. As noted, some European Commission officials believe that the Polish authorities are not doing enough to solve the problem and stop the protest of Polish carriers, RMF reports. Russia has not been elected to the UNESCO Executive Board for the first time. So this is one of these cultural elements of this war where Russia becoming a pariah state means it's having a lack of influence in many different domains. So Russia was not elected to the UNESCO Executive Board during a November the 15th vote, quote, for the first time in history, according to Zelensky. And that was the same with another recent electoral decision in the UN. Russia's earned over $595 billion from fossil fuel exports since 2022, according to the Russian fossil tracker project. The EU remains the largest importer of Russian coal, gas and oil, and purchase fossil fuel from Russia worth over $195 billion. So there's still a lot of work to be done in closing those loopholes and finding alternatives, in changing the way that we consume energy. The international, again, along the same lines as the UNESCO vote, the International Olympic Committee called on national committees to refuse participation in the Friendship Games, which will be held in the Russian Federation. So they're trying to obviously produce an alternative to the Olympic Games because they know they've been banned. And so the IOC has said, we don't want anyone getting involved in that. And of course, that would devalue the brand of the Olympics if there was a competitor that people kind of signed up to. And then the final thing I'm going to talk about today is the Tommy Tuberville putting a block on appointments. Now, there's a rules committee here, which is not the full Senate vote or anything, but you've got senators voting here. It was really interesting. I'll let Amy Klobuchar, who's a Democrat, just give the synopsis.
The ayes are 9, the noes are 7.
Very good. The resolution will be favorably reported. I will note that what this means is that Senator Schumer will be able to call this resolution up to the floor for a vote. And as you are all aware, there are a number of senators on both sides of the aisle, a number of Republican senators who've been very, I will say, loud about wanting to change this policy and wanting to do something, as Senator McConnell just pointed out, to get these.
Right. There's a couple of things to note to this. It just had a vote. It was actually 9-8, but 9-7 officially because Ted Cruz voted by proxy and wasn't there. So his vote's not actually counted. It's recorded so that you know how he feels. But actually, so it's only just 9-8. They voted to reform these rules. Now, Mitch McConnell's been talking about wanting to reform these rules, but he voted against them. And actually, I don't know if this is broadly along party lines. It seems ridiculous. You've got the same people saying, this is terrible. I hate what Tommy Tuberville's doing, and stopping all these appointments to the military is terrible. But, we've got the reforms, so we can vote them en masse, apart from the very top ones, like the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the next kind of level. This is saying that you can't just go out and have to vote on them individually if someone is being a stick in the mud like Tommy Tuberville, so we can get them done, efficiently, aligned with what the military themselves are asking for, and still, Mitch McConnell votes against it.
Nominations through. We believe this is the most sensible way to do it because it is a temporary policy, and I want people to have hope that we are going to get this done. And this is the first step in this process to get these promotions through.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Okay, so that's that. So a temporary sort of stopgap measure. Hopefully it will get through the vote in Senate. That's the Rules Committee that has kind of dealt with that. I'm going to be pretty partisan in what I'm going to say now, which is, like, I like what Klobuchar's done here. It looks like the Democrats just want to govern. Do you know what? And the GOP aren't interested in governing anymore. They're just interested in doing whatever it is that's opposite to what the Democrats want, to what the ruling government. There's no kind of desire to do bipartisan work, it seems. It's really depressing. And then when you see kind of the implosion of the GOP, like the former minority speaker of the House of Representatives that then became majority speaker, and then was voted out, Kevin McCarthy has just elbowed Tim Burchett, who is someone who voted against him, whilst he was being interviewed by NPR. Literally walked past him and did him over, and then he got chased by Tim Burchett down the. What are you doing? Like physically assaulting each other. And then you had the senator, I forget his name, the GOP senator that's just stood up in a select hearing. Stood up and wanted a fist fight with someone that was being interviewed, a Teamster, like a unionist that was being interviewed. Now, admittedly, the senator doesn't like the unions. Okay, there's no need to stand up and offer him out for a fight outside. Bernie Sanders had to stop him and say, mate, you're a senator. What are you doing? What is going on in American politics? It's like disintegrating into craziness at the moment, where you've got these like fringe factions that are having overrepresented power to just upset the apple cart in a really counterproductive way. Anyway, that's just my rant for today. Sorry, I know there are loads of Republicans in my viewership, but there's a lot of Reagan Republicans who've contacted me to say, I'm not a big fan of what's going on at the moment. This is not my kind of republicanism. And I get that. I really get that, because that's how I see it. It's just, yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, everyone. Toodle pips.